Hello, my name is Ali Hussain.
And my name is Peter Cao.
Our studies for the Human Demography Project led us to answer the question, does religion have an impact on survivorship of an individual?
We hypothesized that religious individuals would live a longer life than non-religious individuals in the United States. The null hypothesis would state that religious individuals do not have a longer lifespan than non-religious individuals in the United States.
We decided to go down this route because it made sense to the both of us that a religious individual would live a healthier life. They might potentially abstain from unhealthy habits such as heavy alcohol use, substance abuse, or criminal activity. In fact, I am a Muslim and my own religion dictates that I cannot drink alcohol or commit crimes. It is technically considered haram, which essentially means it is forbidden.
Religious customs and practices influence believers to travel a righteous path and stray from harmful activities.
Additionally, believers could participate in health-promoting activities, both physical and mental. Prayers and meditation practices really calm the mind. I speak from experience. I try to pray every night right before I go to bed, and I feel extremely relaxed. It helps me find a direction in my life.
In fact, a study from CNN by Kristen Rogers showed that praying and really experiencing a mind-to-soul connection helps to calm people in desperate times, such as the global pandemic we're currently in.
Another study from Medical News Today showed that religion might actually increase lifespan by up to 6.48 years. They stated, many religions promote stress-reducing practices that may improve health, such as gratitude, prayer, or meditation.
Ali and I's life experiences and research into the topic led us to believe that religion does promote a longer life than non-religious individuals, which led us to our hypothesis.
So we set out to determine if there was a correlation between survivorship and religious affiliation.
It is interesting to research this connection because religion is a very abstract concept, and it cannot be necessarily defined. Religion is a metaphysical branch of life that has the potential to affect one's life duration. It was the goal of this experiment to see if religion does indeed affect a person's lifespan.
We used cemetery data to determine if this was true. We used data from the United States because it was the easiest to access.
To test the hypothesis about lifespan and religion, we varied the independent variable religious affiliation across 4 study plots, 1 and 2 being experimental and 3 and 4 being the controls. We decided to use Christianity as the religion for the study because there are a plethora of Christian churches in the United States, most of them having a cemetery. We also had to assume a Christian belief for all data points because it is impossible to derive such information purely based on cemetery data.
Peter and I decided to pull cemetery data from the states of Alabama and Massachusetts. According to the Pew Research Center, Michael Lipka and Benjamin Wormald say Alabama is the most religious state in the U.S., while Massachusetts is the least religious state. Interestingly, the trend was northern states are less religious than southern states.
For Alabama, we chose to take cemetery data from Bivens Chapel Cemetery and Central Baptist Cemetery. As for Massachusetts, we chose to take cemetery data from Truro Congressional Cemetery and St. Jean the Baptist Cemetery. These cemeteries were chosen because they were located next to a Christian church, so we can assume a Christian affiliation.
200 names were taken down in an Excel sheet from each cemetery. The data included individuals born after 1875, and their names and birth date, as well as death date, were taken down. After collection was complete, a t-test was used to determine if there was indeed a significance between the two groups.
For study plot 1, 200 names were collected from Bivens Chapel Cemetery and sorted based on their age groups. Several groups were created and several calculations were made to formulate the survivorship of each group. The survivorship data for age groups 1 to 25 were on average 2.9, 26 to 45 an average of 2.8, 46 to 50 an average of 2.7, and so on, until the numbers steadily declined where the survivorship were extremely low at age 96 to 100.
It was interesting to see that age groups 1 through 5 had the highest number of individuals. There seemed to be a high mortality rate during younger years as well as older years. It brought up a few concerns. Humans should have a type 1 survivorship curve, meaning the species should have a low mortality rate when young and a high mortality rate in older years. The curve for study plot 1 shows this to be true, but the outlier does raise questions.
Study plot 2 was a replicate for study plot 1. For study plot 2, 200 names were collected from Central Baptist Cemetery and sorted based on their age groups. Several groups were created and several calculations were made to formulate the survivorship of each group. Survivorship for age groups 1 to 55 were an average 2.9, 56 to 65 an average of 2.8, 66 to 70 an average of 2.7, and the average went on a steady decline until age groups 96 to 100, where the survivorship was extremely low, which was to be expected.
Study plot 2 data was what a type 1 curve should look like. There was a very low mortality rate during younger years and became higher as the age groups advanced. Study plot 2 is a great example of why researchers have replicants. Replicants act as a check to ensure accurate results. The survivorship versus age group curve was very indicative of a type 1 curve.
For study plot 3, 200 names were collected from Truro Congressional Cemetery and sorted based on their age groups. Several groups were created and several calculations were made to formulate the survivorship of each group. Survivorship for age groups 1 to 45 were an average 2.9, 46 to 60 an average of 2.8, 61 to 70 an average of 2.7, and the averages went on a steady decline until age groups 96 to 100, where the survivorship was extremely low.
Study plot 3 had issues much like study plot 1, where there was a higher than expected mortality rate at younger ages. Age group 1 through 5 had 11 individuals who died. This is something you do not expect to see in a type 1 curve, so it raises some concerns.
In study plot 4, 200 names were collected from St. Jean the Baptist Cemetery and sorted based on their age groups. Several age groups were created and calculations were made to find the survivorship of each group. Survivorship for age groups 1 to 55 were on average 2.9, 56 to 65 an average of 2.8, 66 to 70 an average of 2.7, and the averages went on a steady decline until age groups 96 to 100, where the survivorship was extremely low.
We compared study plots 1 and 3, and the data did not seem to support our hypothesis. In fact, the non-religious survivorship curve had a slight lead over the religious survivorship curve. The slope of the non-religious data was less than the religious curve, meaning non-religious people had a greater survivability than religious individuals according to study plots 1 and 3.
When comparing the data of study plot 1 and study plot 3, the t-test yielded a p-value of 0.204, which is much higher than the 0.05 threshold. The t-test demonstrates that religious and non-religious groups do not have a significant difference between them, and therefore the null hypothesis should be accepted.
We compared study plots 2 and 4, and the data did not support our hypothesis. According to the survivorship graph, the survivorship curve of religious individuals and non-religious individuals were essentially the same.
Similarly to study plots 1 and 3, the t-test demonstrates that the two groups were not statistically significant.
After analyzing our data, it was clear that we had to accept the null hypothesis. Religious individuals did not live longer than non-religious individuals.
However, there are many things to consider about our study that needs to be improved upon.
We heavily relied on assumptions for this study, and unfortunately, assumptions in science leads to discrepancies. Assumptions on how religious a deceased person was can be very subjective. Peter and I assumed religious belief based on proximity to a Christian church. We have no possible way to know exactly the person's level of religious belief and commitment barred from speaking with the deceased family members.
Unfortunately, it was extremely demanding to find two states that were similar in demographic info while still having a significant difference in religious beliefs. Northern and southern states are inherently different thanks to climate, geographical area, population size, and lifestyle.
These considerations were difficult to achieve because of the intangible nature of religious affiliation.
Thankfully, this opens the door to many new studies. For example, finding two states with similar demographics but also a significant difference in religious affiliation.
Or studies from the 2000s rather than the 1900s.
Perhaps a completely different religion, such as Hinduism or Islam.
Or even a completely different country other than the US. Our data was not applicable to real life because of the variables that were difficult to keep constant. So religion could indeed increase lifespan, but not according to our data due to the confounding issues. Further research and experimentation would be required.
Here are our sources. Thanks for listening.